And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Microwave Extravaganza, Episode 10, Viva la Status. That's right. And today we are featuring Esoteric Entity. And before we begin, I would like to thank our brand new sponsor, TLDR's Cola-flavored bleach. If you ever have one of those days, please pick up one of these bottles today. It's absolutely delicious, and trust me, it is absolutely a good way to relieve the pain forever. Our next sponsor up is, of course, Apple. Remember, the overlords at Apple have already done away with thinking for you. If you don't want to think anymore, if that's just a little too hard, please buy an iPhone, an iPod, or just about any one of their other products. Thinking, a thing of the past. And of course, finally, we're brought to you by Soros Industries, a company that is all about loving and sharing murder and a lot of other things. Please, let us know what you think in the comments about some of their products. All right, Eso, you want to tell some of the people about just who you are and what you're about. Most of all, I think you should be able to promote your project, considering you're working on that right now. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, everybody. I'm an individualist anarchist YouTuber on YouTube. I associate myself more with ANCAP circles, but my idea of a stateless society would be better described as individualist, because I believe that everybody should be able to associate in any manner that they want. That's truly what a laissez-faire market would be. And the project that I'm working on is I'm trying to recreate a book written by a man named Samuel Edward Konkin III. He wrote a series of books, the first of which was titled The Agorist Primer, and that was him explaining agorism, which is a method of attempting to abolish the state through economic decentralization. And he was going to write a follow-up book, which the title of it was going to be Agorism Contra Marxism, and that was going to be a leftist critique of Marxism. And effectively, the project I'm working on is attempting to recreate that entire book through the 10 essays that are partially finished that he left behind. The essays did give a lot of insight as to what each part of the book was going to be about, so it's not. I'm not going to be taking too many liberties with the things that he said. That just I'm going to basically be expanding upon some things he wasn't able to expand upon as much. That's about the extent of why I need to do anything in order to just publish it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I have 2 laptops and a phone, and I have Discord on my phone. Well, actually, I have 2 phones, ridiculously enough. One is exclusively for calling, and I have a Discord. I have Discord on my other phone and on my computer, and I lost. I stored away one of my other computers I usually use for streaming. So I'm about to send myself an email and then use my phone to send you a link to the Hangout so you can tweet it out or whatever.
All right.
Or actually, better yet, just give me your Twitter. That might make it 1,000 times easier.
I can give you my Gab. I'm banned from Twitter, remember?
Oh, shit, I didn't know that. Oh, man. That's just lovely. Do you have to pay for Gab? Because I don't think I have it.
No, but I'm not sure how they're doing it now. I joined Gab pretty early on, but when I joined, it was invite only. It might be different now since I joined like a year ago, but...
Yeah, I don't have Gab at the moment. I'm sorry. I'm gonna get that eventually, but like right now, holy shit. I'm literally trying to build my own business right now. We would be a weapons manufacturer. Well, not really weapons, but more like self-defense equipment in general. Which I know sounds really a bit on the extreme side, doesn't it?
Not really.
Not really?
Yeah, it's pretty mundane actually. Just yeah. I mean, you could use them, you could collect them, you could use them for self-defense. Weapons themselves are just inanimate objects.
I know. Although, I guess I've just been arguing with so many people on the left who just don't realize if you don't touch the gun, it stays there. And it leaves you alone.
There's not really a that's not really a left-right argument, but it does seem to be disproportionately on the mainstream left. That's because the mainstream left has basically a fetish for the government.
Yeah. Now, can I explain what I really am? Just kind of tell you, like,
All right.
look at it. Yeah. So I consider myself a minarchist, not because I believe that the state is a moral entity. I believe it's immoral by nature. But have you seen American Sniper or Sicario? Either one of those movies?
I've seen a little bit of American Sniper, didn't watch the whole thing, and I have not seen the other one.
Oh, Sicario! I gotta say, it's probably one of the most pro border control movies I've ever seen. Like, a lot of people think it makes the border control look bad, but actually, I think it looks the opposite way. And actually, I gotta ask: are you open borders, or are you just more like like anti-open borders?
I would consider myself, I suppose, it's a more complicated question than that. Of course, I don't believe in borders, but when you say open border, that sort of associates me with a lot of the people who are causing the problem, which is people who believe in welfare programs along with their migration policy, and that's largely what's causing all of this.
Oh, well, okay. So
If you look back to the early 20th century in the United States, there wasn't right now currently for each country. I don't know if it's for each country or if it's just in general. There's a limit to the amount of people who can immigrate to the United States. It's about 50,000 a year. That's legally speaking, according to how the government defines it. Well, in the early 20th century, there was no limit to that. There also wasn't a welfare state, at least the time that I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the 20s and the 1910s.
Okay, but if I will say, it sounds like if it wasn't for the whole welfare thing, you would probably be someone who wouldn't care about borders. But would you go with the philosophy of it's my house and you should have to ask my permission to come into it?
If it wasn't for the welfare policies directly benefiting migrants at the expense of everybody else, and political policies which are designed to essentially put these people in a position of state privilege, then I would really just say, okay, do whatever you want as long as you're not doing it on my property.
Oh, on your specific individual property, not like on the not in the place that we call the United States.
As in cross my property line to my house, and if you're not welcome there, we'll have some problems.
Yeah, specifically you, I'm guessing, right? And anyone else who doesn't want them on their property.
But as I was about trying to explain, millions of people would come annually, and it was actually an economic benefit because what they would do is they would expand the labor pool, and that would be great for our economy. That would be great for our production because that would greatly lower the cost of labor, which in turn would lower the cost of living.
Well, that's actually kind of becoming a problem in and of itself, though, nowadays, because
the problem nowadays is that the cost of labor isn't lowering because you have all these regulations. And
actually, I think it's kind of the opposite. I think it's kind of the opposite because I think that the problem is that with more immigrants coming in.
The push for the $15 an hour minimum wage. You don't consider that to be a problem.
What?
You don't consider that to be
I do. Do you mind if I explain?
Okay.
So I think that the immigration is making it a lot harder to pay Americans, especially millennials. Oh, I can't. 1 second. Call me back in a second, but just come over. Sorry, that was my girl.
All right.
But yeah, she lives about 20 minutes away, so we got time.
That's nice.
But when yeah, I know. Well, I like her, but I'm not a soy boy that goes like, oh my god, I need to kiss the floor you walk on. Oh, I just came. No. But here's the thing. When you think about it, I think that people born in the United States, considering we still do have a government, so for at least now, until you're anarchist, dream comes along, we are still going to have to function in the form of, this is the U.S., now Mexico. Mexicans are coming over, and yes, they legitimately are taking away jobs that would at least be good entry-level jobs for a lot of Americans that they need to get experience. And therefore, a lot of companies that would pay for higher quality are going to pay for cheaper prices, despite the fact that, that it acts.
Yeah, I get that. The problem with that argument is it predicates the idea that if we've realized that the problem with immigration is political programs which are designed to privilege them in the courts and in criminal justice, and these welfare programs which give them economic benefits at everyone else's expense. If we've recognized that, and you say that I'm against borders, how come you reason that I'm for that, but I'm against borders? And I've heard that argument a lot. Well, while we have a state, while we have a state, and while it's not a stateless society, we have to have borders, because if we don't have that, then we would have all these other problems. Well, no, we have these other problems because of things that I'm also against.
Well, part of the other problem is that it's also about other countries that do also have governments that haven't gotten rid of them, that might subvert us. Even if we were to go ANCAP, let's be honest. Here's the thing. Here's an argument that I think that I will have to make in general to you. I've argued with Anarchist. Have you ever heard of him? He's another anarchist.
Maybe I have, but I haven't heard his name by that pronunciation before.
Yeah, he's out of Romania. I probably pronounced it wrong.
All right.
But he by the way, he doesn't even believe in the non-aggression principle. Well, I think he does. He believes in what he calls the law. Have you heard of that?
The law.
Kind of the idea, like what he said is the first part of the law is that whoever gains access to a resource first is the immediate owner and stuff like that.
That's a concept that I'm unfamiliar with. It doesn't sound like anything I've heard before.
It's all right, and well, he I look at one of my previous streams he was on. So here's an argument I would always like to make. You see, I've heard people make this argument that if we did get rid of the government, crime would not increase because they oftentimes say people wouldn't just forget morality like that. My response is I kind of go with the Jungian kind of way of looking at it. A lot of people say, oh, I'm good because I don't hurt people. And my response is, are you sure? Are you sure you're just not scared? Because I think we should start with that first. And have
you heard of something called neuroplasticity? It's
that's the ability to change the way you think and behave.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a more accurate description would be it's a neurological phenomena that occurs within human psychology that your personality will change depending on your environment, and this exists. This has been observable throughout human history as societies drastically change from one point to another, and I think the best example of this would be you're familiar with the Jamestown colony, right? Like the original economic model of the Jamestown colony.
Wasn't it like the first?
Command-based. It was a command-based economy based on the model of what Europe was practicing at the time, which was mercantilism.
Which was kind of like a cross. Wasn't that a cross between capitalism but run by the state? So essentially fascism.
It was the belief that production can only occur from the state, and from that, it generally led to people wanting to create feudalistic models of how the state should be run. Yeah. But the point is that when you had this command-based economy, the society based on this command model, you had rampant crime, and you had just this community which was killing itself. You had it was just awful. But then they changed things by I'm sure you're familiar. They made it basically a market-based system, close to liberalism, but it was still essentially the only rule was that what they had initially was sort of a gift-based system where there was a community pool of resources that would be created, and everyone put into the community pool, and people took as much as they wanted. The rule that they changed was that you couldn't, if you didn't work anymore, then you wouldn't be able to take out of the, you wouldn't be able to take any resources, and there was no more community pool.
Yeah,
that was what they changed. So it wouldn't necessarily be considered a free market system. They just got rid of the parasitic elements of that society.
So in other words, it was like the first communist society.
And instantly, people crime dropped. Society began to prosper a little better. So that's and what we have historical examples of stateless societies, and from these stateless,
I really don't believe that.
We have Ireland in Norse territories. We have Cospia, which was a principality that existed in the middle of Italy, between the Papal States and northern Italy from about 1442 to 1820 something.
But I have to look at that because I don't remember any of that. What I do remember, what I do see a lot though, is that well, first off, what you were talking about seems more like the problem was that they were going on one of the worst. Come on, let's be honest. That was probably the most primitive form of communism we've ever seen in Jamestown. And as we know, anything close to a socialistic sharing kind of society de-incentivizes work. And therefore, I think the poverty and the lack of feeling like
the problem is that the problem is that without an active form of commerce in the communist system, there aren't any supply and demand curves, and because there aren't any supply and demand curves, you can't properly distribute commodities because you aren't able to you aren't able to know how much people need and where, and that's the reason why all socialist models or all state-controlled models of production ultimately run on rationing. It doesn't matter if it's a socially democratic state or even a U.S. state. That's inevitably what will happen. Is you will have to end up rationing resources because without the supply and demand curves, it's not possible to properly allocate your resources.
Well, that's somewhat true, but it's also because there's like if you produce but you don't see a direct correlation to reward for your production, you probably won't work, will you?
Yeah, well, that's another problem with that model. I'm just saying, like, even if you were to get rid of the incentive problem, you wouldn't be able to get over that fact. Even the Soviet Union, for example, they had very complex mathematical formulas to attempt to properly distribute their resources. I mean, they tried, but they couldn't get around the fact that without supply and demand curves, it just wasn't.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know. I get it. I get it. You know, you have to be able to measure out, like, you know, the difference between how much people are consuming versus how much you can produce, right?
Exactly. And without those curves, you don't know that.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry. I really got sidetracked. What I was trying to say when I was trying to say my minarchist belief was simple. I believe that the state is an immoral kind of a creature. But at the beginning, do you remember the beginning of American Sniper? When he's on the roof?
Yeah, where they're in
Fallujah?
I might be mixing up my movies here, but didn't that begin in Libya?
No. It was in Iraq. The movies took place in Fallujah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm mixing up my movies.
All right.
I know what you're talking about now. I think I was thinking about some movie on Benghazi that I'd seen.
Oh yeah, 13 Hours.
Yeah.
The first time Michael Bay put in a little bit of effort in a long time. God damn it! Why is that the first time he put an effort into a movie?
But
yeah, but the beginning, as you can clearly see, you obviously, spoilers for anyone who doesn't know, he was actually Chris was on top of the roof. He saw a woman who was clearly carrying some kind of weapon. It was a they said it was a grenade, but it looks honestly kind of like a mortar. Whatever.
No, I know what you're talking about. It wasn't it. there was a woman wearing a hijab, and there were some soldiers walking down the street, and she was like,
she gave it to her kid.
she was talking to some kid, and then the kid started running because he was obviously wearing a bomb belt.
No,
And,
he wasn't wearing a bomb belt. He was given the grenade or bomb.
oh, okay.
Yeah, she was to the mother, and she handed it to him, and he was told to run at them. Yeah. By the way, I don't call it a hijab. I call it a liberation veil. Remember, women, we totally respect you if we don't want to see what the fuck you look like.
Well,
make me a sandwich because you're liberated.
All right. So, what were you getting at with minarchism? Just
the idea. So, some minarchists believe that a small amount of the state is a moral entity, and kind of like how fascists believe that it unites us as a people. I don't believe that. What I believe is that culture unites us, and I believe that culture is extremely important, but that the state is like shooting the kid. You do it because it's the best of bad solutions. I personally would be an anarchist if I believe that a government would not function, would not come out of nothing.
You remember as what I was talking about earlier with neuroplasticity?
Well, yes, but before you say anything, I would like it if you can maybe on Discord send me some links to information about those quote unquote stateless societies, because I've looked into a lot of history. I haven't been able to find anything that was actually truly stateless. Kind of like how
all of human history before 5,500 years ago was stateless, and what's interesting about that is there's evidence of mass organization as far back as 100,000 years ago. Maritime trade routes, for example, we have documented proof that maritime trade routes, which that means mass trade between continents, existed as far back as 100,000 years ago. While the modern states first formed in ancient Mesopotamia in 3,500 BC. So I think that's rather fascinating. But to get back to what I was pointing at, and yeah, I'll send you links on that after the stream. But I mentioned neuroplasticity because what we've learned from stateless societies, we have been able to observe, and we have documentation about, is that once the state's gone, communities become closer with one another. They form sort of a kinship with one another, as if they're not necessarily that they're all family, but it's sort of like everybody has mutual respect, not by necessity, but it's just everybody. It's kind of like a small town. I'm having a hard time describing it, but that's essentially how it is. Everybody knows one another within a close area, and everybody is very closely associating with one another because it's in their interest to do so. But that's what all of them are like, and it's not like they're all small communities. I mean, some of them, there are tens, hundreds of thousands of people living there, so it's not just because
they're far apart.
It's not just because they're close together, so they form sort of like small communities. No, it's because without a state, they work more closely together with others because they understand that they are responsible for securing their own rights, which is really all that it has to be. And that moves me into my biggest complaint with minarchism. There really is not a difference ethically between minarchism and the worst brand of totalitarianism, because the state, by its mere existence, has to violate your rights, and it has to infringe upon your liberties. So
I don't see it as a moral. I don't see it as a moral issue. I see it as a practicality issue.
And the state, yeah, I get it, but the state at any time. I mean, I know it's more complicated than that with the systems that they've set up. You'd have to get a lot of politicians to agree, but if all the politicians decided to make the United States Constitution virtually identical to the Constitution of North Korea, there would be absolutely nothing stopping them, because they're the state and they ultimately have the power to do whatever. Yeah,
but they're not a monolith.
You can think that the Constitution shouldn't be changed. The fact of the matter is that's nothing more than a legal philosophy. The reality of it is that politicians absolutely can change the Constitution anytime that they want, and that terrifies me, and as it should to everybody.
Yeah. Well, so to a certain degree, but the government itself is not a monolith. That would be ridiculous to look at it like that. And a monolith is much easier to control.
No, I get that, but what I'm saying is that that could happen. Say, and you know how, as somebody who's skeptical of authority, and you're skeptical of authority, and you've explained, like, just in our conversations casually, you've hinted at you don't like Hillary Clinton very much, and you don't like these big government shills. Well,
I don't like them at all.
It's not beyond the realms of possibility when you have a monopoly on arbitration, which is all the government is, that you could get a bunch of lying psychopaths together one day to say, you know what, we are going to create some sort of Orwellian dystopia, and there's nothing that people can do about it. It's not like your voting actually changes anything. Have you seen what actually gets passed versus what people vote for? Voting is statistically irrelevant, not just in the U.S., but in every government.
Well, there's also the idea that democracy is the god that failed. You know, Hans Hermann Hoppe in his old book.
I'm not a Hoppian. I have my own criticisms of his ideas.
I'm not that either. I do think that, though, it's good to. I don't think I have to believe in any one person's philosophy. I think I can take little bits and pieces that I agree with from everyone.
I'm personally inspired by Konkin. I mentioned him. He's my main influence for economics and philosophy. I'm inspired by a man named Lysander Spooner. And I talked about him a lot, but he's one of the most woke men in all of human history.
Well, you used the term woke? I'm sorry, it's just such a meme at this point. It's hard not to laugh.
You should read No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. It's like not even 100-page long book, and he just absolutely destroys the concept of political authority, let alone the government.
Does he basically say that the Constitution is kind of like a thin wall rather than a fortress, like as in it will fail eventually?
No, he scientifically demonstrates that it's not possible for the government to legitimately have political authority, and he demonstrates the absurdity of a government attempting to have dominion over the people that it supposedly claims to represent.
Yeah,
it's really an amazing book.
I do want to say this. There is some. I have been looking into some more esoteric, and no, that's not a hint to your name. I have been looking into some more esoteric meanings behind a lot of symbolism in our capital. And I started thinking how righteous were our founding fathers in reality, because if you look at some of like for instance, there's a statue of George Washington with one hand pointing above and the other below, as above, so below, which is an alchemist principle. And if you know anything about alchemy, almost all alchemists completely denounce the church. Now, I'm not saying that the church has always been good. At one point, the church was a state unto itself, above kings even, which I don't think is a good thing.
Pope Benedict IV, I think, was... I don't know much about the history of the papacy, so I'm not even sure if that's even a real pope, but yeah.
Okay.
The pope at the beginning, in the beginning of the 13th century, the pope in the beginning of the 13th century, whoever that was basically the point which started the Enlightenment.
Yeah, but I mean, I haven't been completely in support of like everything the church does, because as a Catholic myself, I see the church as a communion of flawed human beings worshiping something better than ourselves. But you got to admit, there is a lot of things in Christianity that have been designed to keep people from destroying each other. And it has been shown in plenty of scientific studies that the idea of the nuclear family wasn't just a crackpot idea invented by a bunch of world-controlling churchgoers.
Well, there are a lot of aspects of the Bible which also are critical of government and political authority, which a lot of Christians or pretend Christians are real statists. But if they actually read the book of Samuel, particularly in the beginning of chapter 8, it's very has a very borderline anarchist appeal to it.
Yeah, give unto God what belongs to God. I know this is different parts, but give unto God what belongs to God, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Very much separation from the state itself.
Yeah, that's
I think that's the most well-known one. Yeah. But overall, the point I'm trying to make is I have been kind of suspicious of our founding fathers to a certain degree, because, like I said, a lot of them believe in a very Luciferian philosophy of teaching people to become their own gods. There's a lot of alchemist and esoteric meaning behind a lot of symbolism. I know In God We Trust was originally put on the money, particularly to say to say go fuck yourself to the communists during during the Red Scare. But
I've always been incredibly skeptical of them, but I've been learning about Hamilton, and I've also been learning about the more obscure liberal philosophers, and it turns out there's a lot of these liberal philosophers that essentially they precede Smith and Rousseau and Locke, and it's just the more famous liberal philosophers are essentially just controlled opposition. And you can look at the Revolutionary War. The thing you have to look at when it comes to all political history that everybody forgets about is funding. Political events don't just happen. Every single one of them, there's been funding behind it. And all the ones within the last few hundred years, you can connect back to the Rothschild dynasty. And that's not necessarily the American Revolution, but there were. I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm talking about central banks and banking elites. And the Rothschild dynasty was behind the overthrowing of the Tsar in Russia, which of course led to the Soviet Union.
Well, hold on. Well, okay, first off, the Jew part was a joke. It was a joke. Okay. But although it is true that 50% of the communists were actually Jews themselves, and the Rothschilds are primarily Jewish ethnically.
Well, that's not relevant. My point, and if we really want to get back to communism, Marx himself was a Rothschild stooge. In fact, that was pretty famously pointed out by Mikhail Bakunin, who was an anarcho-communist. And that pretty much, and because he called out Rothbard, fucking Marx as a Rothschild stooge, he wrote like a very public piece about it. He got kicked out of First International, but I mean, this is well known if you actually know anything about the history of First International.
Wait. He was a Rothschild.
Yeah. Why? If you actually, he had very close ties to the Rothschild banking dynasty, and that becomes even more sinister when you read the Communist Manifesto and see that the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto is to have a central bank in the communist government, despite the fact that the communist society doesn't even have money. They have a central bank.
Oh, the irony, right?
Well, it's very obvious. Like, you read that at first and you just think, well, that doesn't make any sense because this is supposed to be a classless, moneyless society, and yet they're proposing a central bank. Then you learn that Marx has ties to the Rothschilds, and you're like, oh, that makes more sense now.
So he was pretty much, I think, promoting a system of slavery to the Rothschilds under the guise of liberation.
Pretty much. That's what Bakunin attempted to expose.
Bakunin, I think, liked some of his ideas, but didn't.
Bakunin agreed more with Marx than he did us, but that one thing that he did, I think that shows that he was at least intellectually honest. He was honest. He wasn't a very dishonest person. He at least had good intentions.
Yeah, he believed in some of the parts, but he was kind of like, okay, just because I found a gold bar in a trash bag doesn't mean I'm going to take the whole thing, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so I think is this one of your beliefs that any kind of government will eventually lead to totalitarianism?
I think that any form of government is inherently totalitarian because the mere existence of political authority, the idea itself, is the idea that a political ruling class has dominion over you. I think
in some shape or form.
What was that?
In some shape or form, because let's be honest.
Yes, at its very bare minimum, the government, in order to exist, it has to steal from you, and it has to force itself to associate with you. Those two things right there, you can't necessarily argue against a government if it tries to expand on those, because a government, in order to exist, has to do that. If they want to force themselves into your life, well, you can attempt to utilize the utter failure of a system, which just demonstrably doesn't work, to basically beg the politicians not to get involved in your life. But you don't really have an argument against it if you accept state authority.
Well, no. Well, see, okay. So let's define a state. A group of individuals with control over a group of individuals within a certain land space. So, anyways,
a government is a monopoly on arbitration. That's the history of governments. When they formed in ancient Mesopotamia, that's how governments came into existence. A group of
the monopoly on force.
Bands of tribes got together, and they violently forced all arbitration out of the market, and they declared themselves to be the only ones who could be arbitration for anyone's problems in society.
Arbitration, because I'm not even sure
arbitration, like courts. Like if somebody has a problem, the form in which they dispute their problem and try and reach a resolution. A state is nothing more than a monopoly on that service.
Okay, but what about when people violate other people's human rights, but there's not enough clear evidence to prove whether or not someone did or not just by looking at
them? You don't need a state to get evidence. That's what
you don't need to. Some people may not recognize it. Some people may not recognize it, and when you violate someone's rights, there has to be an inherent punishment. If it was all based on private entities, that would kind of almost be civil disputes. And what if that person flees? What if that person flees and you're trying to and you wanted to determine what degree of punishment to get to that person? So you would have to have someone be able to.
Have you heard? Okay.
What's up?
I thought you said listen to me, and I said okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I just want to finish. So, sorry, I wasn't yelling. Actually, I said something else, but I'm not trying to yell. But you would have to have someone and be able to say it doesn't matter what you think. Party B, you violated the rights of Party A. Therefore, even if you and Party A haven't come into an agreement, you are going to get hurt for your transgressions.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, have you heard of? Because there are a lot of people who attempt to explain this, and Filthy Heretic, are you familiar with him? He made a video on this recently.
I'm familiar with Filthy Frank, but unfortunately not Heretic.
Yeah, you should look up his channel. He made a video called Anarcho-Capitalism and the Courts Problem, but essentially, and that's basically an explanation for anyone who's curious.
Yeah.
About how justice in a stateless society would work, but basically, I pointed that out because I'm probably going to do a terrible job explaining it.
So it's always easier to link to someone else.
We can demonstrate, of course, you would agree, we can demonstrate that things are inherently unethical because we can demonstrate that logic is objective. And if logic is objective, then necessarily there are actions which you can demonstrate to be justified and you can't explain. And the ones that you can't explain and you can't demonstrate, those are the ones which are inherently unjustified, such as stealing from somebody else or murdering them. You can't justify that because the other person is a free operating agent with self-ownership, and in order to do that, you have to declare that you have dominion over them because they have dominion over their lives and their property.
Well,
that's one example, but that's more of an example of how you can demonstrate something to be objectively right or wrong in a arbitration service. But
so do you have the stream on yours?
What was that?
I can hear feedback from your side.
Yeah, your mic wasn't sounding too good either. So let me. All right, is that better?
Yeah. Oh, that's better. Okay. So, first off, let me ask you something about what do you think of
a moment. What was that?
Oh, sorry. What do you think of my philosophy when it comes to minarchism? Because and more specifically, the term status, I think, has kind of become a meaningless term because, in my opinion, it kind of assumes motive in the idea that you like that the person you call a status must like the state, kind of like how you would say someone who's a globalist likes the idea of a global one world government, rather than maybe saying that they have states beliefs, they believe in a system you find immoral, but they have nuance as to why.
Well, I don't think it assumes motive. It's more the term status is just a description of somebody who believes in state authority, and that's not an inaccurate explanation of description of somebody who believes false things.
But you have to admit the way things sound will affect the way they are perceived. It's kind of like saying you call someone a rapist, but let's say that maybe the term was originally invented to describe someone who has seen rape in the past. But I know that's not a completely accurate term, but even if it was technically considered that, rapist would still come off, especially in the tone of an argument and the ways you would color someone and their reputation, as saying they enjoy the rape. Status almost seems like someone who would enjoy the state, not just simply believe that it needs to exist. For me,
I use it in both terms to describe something which assumes the legitimacy of state authority, and I also use it basically not necessarily as a derogatory term, but if I'm arguing with somebody and they propose something which just doesn't make any sense, I say, wow, what a remarkably statist assumption.
Okay, I can see that. So, by the way, originally, I think the reason why we even had this debate in the first place was because, I made that video called Ancapistan, a nation.
Yeah, and I just couldn't get around to responding to that because there are a bunch of different things coming up, and a lot of the arguments you were making in that video were things that I'd already responded to before, and I'd watched like the first 2 minutes of it without actually watching the video. And I was just like, yeah, this doesn't really seem like something that would be worth my time to respond to.
Well, did you hear my whole spiel about Niccolo Machiavelli and talking about the lack of protection that you could actually have with private military being?
Yeah, and I suppose that's a problem if you're not an agorist. And this is why I love Konkin so much, because Konkin basically he explained that through decentralization of the economy, and he pointed out that if you were to completely decentralize the system and innovate the possibility that it could be centralized out of existence, then you wouldn't even have to worry about the idea of a tyrant coming around and attempting to create another state, because it would be impossible at that point.
All right. Well, hey,
that's essentially what's happened with cryptocurrency. Essentially, eventually the U.S. dollar is going to collapse. Fiat 100%
the gold standard
historically has a 100% failure rate, and the only thing propping up the U.S. dollar right now
The military?
is NATO forcing companies to trade with it in oil through an agreement. I forgot what it's right now. Yeah.
But hey, what if we went back to the gold standard? I think that would work.
The gold standard is a temporary solution to the problem of fiat, but the problem with fiat is that in a fiat economy, you need to constantly create credit expansions, which is a big part of the reason why fiat is so unsustainable. And if you have a finite reserve of gold, then it's not possible to sustain itself. That's the reason why.
But I thought that the idea behind why the U.S. dollar is collapsing is because it's not based on a fixed amount of value, in which it not exploits and inflates.
Well, the problem is that it's literally just printed out of thin air. The treasury.
That's what I mean. It's infinitum how much you can print, but there's no value behind any of it.
Yeah, the only thing which is actually manipulating the value is, like I said, NATO forcing countries to trade with the U.S. dollar.
Wasn't it also backed by military?
So that the demand for the U.S. dollar is artificially inflated to be somewhat more sustainable than it actually is. If that agreement were to disappear tomorrow and they actually started trading with a valuable commodity in oil, then the U.S. dollar would be gone, like by the end of the week, easily.
Ooh. So is there a way of slowly coming down off that?
Well, that's what I was mentioning, is that the
Bitcoin and
the counter economy that exists. I think that once the market eventually does collapse, this is a way that the economy will be decentralized at some point. I think when the market collapses, which this is the most likely scenario in which cryptocurrencies will be stabilized, people will begin to see that cryptocurrencies are holding their value relative to the U.S. dollar and therefore look like a more
sustainable
asset. And I think more people will put their money in cryptocurrencies while the value of the dollar is declining.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think that I got to go soon, but what would you say to a solution that I think Minarchist and Anarchist could probably get to, which is that we continue to try to make the government smaller and smaller and smaller, and we just keep going until we have problems. And if anarchism is better than minarchism, we'll just keep going until there is no government. And if minarchism is better, we'll keep going past that point, and it'll backfire and we'll have to go back.
And well, I already sort of outlined this problem. First of all, there's the idea that you can try and achieve such a political change through the system, but also anarchists and minarchists. This isn't really a personal judgment. It sounds like a personal statement, but just know that it's not.
Okay.
Anarchists and minarchists will never be on a common ground, because the difference between anarchists and minarchists is that while you don't necessarily like state authority, you are incredibly skeptical of it. You see it as a sort of necessary evil to exist.
Yeah.
And while anarchists, they don't see it as a necessary evil. In fact, they reject the concept that something can be both evil and necessary. And
well, that's I think a little bit of a blind spot you guys have.
And the problem here is also that you see a sort of limited government as being different than a totalitarian system, and that's what I touched upon earlier, that anarchists don't see it that way. You're still forcing people to associate, you're still stealing from them, you're still violating their rights. Even if somehow, hypothetically, we were to keep a government at its most limited form it could possibly exist at, then you would still have that problem, that ethical problem. But on an economic front as well, the government exists to perpetuate itself. As the populations expand and as the government's the government necessarily needs to be spending more as the population expands and as more people are using more commodities. And that's the main difference between a market-based system and that ration-based government system I was explaining earlier. For the government, an expanding population is a bad thing. It's a thing which challenges their system and makes it so it's not possible to sustain, because they only have a finite number of resources and they can't actually produce anything. They need to steal from others to produce things, which is why the government's an inherently parasitic entity. And as this is the case, if the demand for these nationalized services increases, then the government will have to tax more in order to fund its services. And the problem with this is that you can only tax people so much until your rate of returns diminishes, because people will just stop working because their opportunity cost will be set higher than what their labor is actually, what they're working from being laborers and being taxed by the state. A lot of people will turn to black markets for labor, and the state is therefore an unsustainable model of society, because it will continue taxing until there's either a 100% tax or the system collapses. And there can't be a 100% tax, because if nobody's making any money, then, and all of the jobs or whatever are from the government, then you get back to the economic calculation problem that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The system will literally collapse.
I gotta get going soon. So there is one more point I wanted to hit on and just get your opinion. By the way, when we're done with this, would you mind on your own time, like soon, like downloading like the stream and mirroring it on your channel? So
sure,
that,
I can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you have to agree with any of my opinions, but you know, I don't think there's any personal bias, and
no, there's not.
Yours.
I enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, I enjoy yours too. I really think that if there was ever a war between ideologies, I think we'd be like, let's kill everyone else, then kill each other. Because I'd rather have one of us win than anyone else, like the fascists or the communists. You know.
I'd agree with that. I suppose.
Like it'd be, but I personally would never hate you as a person either. Do you agree with me that most people don't actually understand what fascism is? Because I think a lot of people, we're talking about minarchism versus Anarchism, but let's be honest, I think most of the general populace doesn't even understand what real capitalism is, what communism was, and what fascism is. Because
I can attest to that, because you don't know how many times people have come to me and told me that I'm a fascist and that I believe in suppressing labor movements. It's just like,
what the fuck? Well, the thing is, let's just define it right now, because this is what Marshall Ironside has told me. This is what's like, Fascist Kid has told me. This is what a bunch of actual fascists who I've talked to have told me, that it's corporatism. It's the marriage between corporations and the states.
It's a command economy.
It's a type of command economy, but with a much more nationalistic view. And there is some separation, at least in theory, and probably not in practice, but in theory, but between the states and corporations. But corporations still work as a cooperative with the state, right?
Well, the problem with making that distinction is that in a corporatist society, the corporations have the exact same problem that the state does, because the state subsidizes them and imposes regulations to establish these corporations as having a monopoly on the market. And this is especially prominent in fascist governments. And essentially at that point, they're not even private entities anymore. They're just de facto arms of the government.
Yeah, they're basically it's like if Blackwater, which is now Academy, were to just basically say, hey, we will only work for you now. We're still our own thing, but we work for you. It's like you're basically us then, but you're just another tentacle reaching out. All right, so I think we should end it on that. And before I go, I'd like to say to everyone, I will start to make a few videos about the esoteric meanings behind a lot of the symbolism in the founding fathers and a lot of what they've created. Also, check out my channel when it comes to my latest video, which is about the importance of taboos and shame. And this specific one is about fame. The one after that will be about abortion. And yeah, because I truly believe that, not everything needs to be regulated by the state. I personally hate a lot of things about the states. And so I think a lot of things should still be stigmatized. Like, for instance, I think non-monogamous sex should be stigmatized. I think pornography should be stigmatized. I think there's a lot of things you can have be shamed without it being illegal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, social cohesion, that's something that a lot of people forget about.
Yeah, you don't need everything to be illegal to also be looked at as bad. You should still have some stigmas.
Well, something that's illegal that's the government saying that they're the only ones.
Your head and say you can't do it, right? Sorry, they're going to point a gun to your head and say you can't do it. That's what illegal means.
The government's the only one that's allowed to do it. That's all something being illegal means.
That's so true. It's okay if we do it, but not if you do it. Anyway, also, when you download the video and re-upload it, make sure to leave my channel in the description. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, and if you ever want to me to mirror something that you think is important to get out, let me know.
All right, that sounds good because that happens a little bit.
Yeah. Have a good one, Esso.
All right, see ya.
Bye.